Welcome to the Thinklings Podcast, a conversation where good thoughts help renew the mind with the Word of God. I'm Charlie Carter, and I'm here with Tim Little and Andy Stearns. Let's jump into the conversation. Welcome to the Thinklings Podcast. We are going to do something special today. We're going to have a guest and kick off a month of guests, and we'll introduce our guest in a little bit. But before we do that, we, as always, have some Thinklings business to tend to.
Books in business.
Books in business.
Every time.
Okay, so who wants to go first?
All right, I'll go first. Back in season 1, I made this comment about how nobody likes to gift me books for Christmas because my life is books. And then I had 2 friends gift me books for Christmas. And one of them is the one that I'm going to share right now. It's Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl. Thank you, Thinklings Stearns. I'm interested in Jewish history, even modern history. I think I commented on Ariel Sharon's book, The Warrior, during season 1. And this one about the Holocaust. Anne Frank was a young girl, Jewish girl. Between the age of 13 and 15, she was in hiding. It reminded me of Corrie ten Boom. So it's a very similar situation, similar scenario. They were in hiding for a couple of years. And so it's her diary. And this is one thing I really liked about the book and why I wanted to read it was because it is a first-person perspective. There's a lot of tertiary sources on the world wars, tertiary literature on the Holocaust, and even the modern establishment of the nation of Israel. But to get like a firsthand perspective, that's kind of what I wanted to see. And here it's a girl's diary. So you have experiences like D-Day. And when D-Day happened, they're all excited. And she writes about it in her diary. And then all of the problems that they constantly had to endure from a first-person perspective. I mean, going to the bathroom was a big deal and not very comfortable. Taking baths or showers or any of that kind of thing was very cumbersome. So it was just very interesting to get an idea what hiding was like for a group of Jewish people. There were 8 of them, as they were hiding from the police, from the Germans, there in Holland. And so it was just a fascinating read. I really liked it. It does not have a happy ending. They are eventually turned in, and then they're just sent throughout the German the camps and so on and so forth. They all died, all except for one. Anne's father lived, and he was the one that...
Spoiler alert.
...collected... Well, I
guess if you haven't read it by now...
It's kind of been around a while.
Just a little bit. But still. I was in my mind, I'm like, I could comment, because I've read it. I was like, I could comment about some things, but I don't want to give it away. And then right as I'm thinking that, you're like, they all died. So, okay.
It's a historical story, and I'm guessing most people are familiar with Anne Frank. But
yeah, probably.
If you weren't, there you go. I blew it for you. So in case you were wondering, yeah, it doesn't end well. So they have like a little story at the end where they kind of explain it all. That's not her diary, obviously. It just, her diary abruptly ends because they were found out. And so it just kind of even illustrates the sovereignty of God and how God, I think, really used a story like this little girl's diary where people were able to see the life of a child and how that life was snuffed out in this way. And a lot of people were influenced by it. And I think that God even used that in the establishment of the modern state of Israel. So yeah, a really good read. If you haven't read it, I would recommend reading through Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl. I kind of wanted my son to read it, but there are some more sensitive things because she is a young girl. So, excuse me, she's talking about, things that young girls go through between the ages of 13 and 15. So just a little bit of discernment there too.
So if you had to put this on the Thinklings goodness scale,
I'd probably give it a 7.
A 7?
I don't know if it's necessarily something that you need to read, but with all the disinformation going on in our culture and people kind of, romanticize or even they outright deny certain facets of history, I think it's really important to read primary source information concerning historical events. And this would be one of them. And for that perspective, I really appreciated it.
Sure. I can go next. So I have The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis, and I had no idea what this book was about, and all I had as an introduction was Tim saying that It was really weird. I can't remember. Did you say that on the podcast a while back?
I think so. I think I reviewed The Great Divorce and said it was odd and I didn't really understand some of it.
Yeah, it is. It's very out there.
I think I have not read it, and I teach a class on Lewis. It's on my books to read, but every single person that I know who's read it has said the exact same thing you two have said. It's like out there.
And so, just a very quick synopsis. The main character is in hell, and he gets on a bus with a bunch of people who live in hell, and that bus is going to heaven. And they get up there, and they realize that they, the ghosts from hell, aren't really solid. They're like shadowy, ghosty people, so much so that when they step on the grass, it hurts their feet, and it's like they're not physical in any way, and like they're not a part of this world. But there are these solid spirits that come out of the mountains of heaven, and there are these dialogues that happen where these solid people, I guess as you'd think is like people that are in heaven, are trying to convince the ghosts from hell to choose to stay. Like, come with me to the mountains, and they don't want to for a lot of different reasons. And the ideas of like purgatory are thrown around, and so like anyone with a theological background is the moment I read that word, I was like, oh, okay. But then he kind of qualifies it at the end where you spoiled Anne Frank, so I'm going to spoil Great Divorce. You find out at the end that he was asleep the whole time, and he actually has a conversation in the book with George MacDonald, his favorite author, and they have this discussion about, is his experience, like the bus and the heaven and hell, is this what it's really like? And he's like, well, who's to say what's really true or not? The real issue is like, would you really not go to heaven? Would you really hold on to these things and not go to heaven? It's like that's the emphasis is put on this choice of the ghost to go to heaven or not.
Yeah, and when is that choice? As he applies it at the end, he applies it to the present, not to the future.
They have a discussion about when the decision is, and it's more or less like, who's to say that it's before or after? It's this, there is a decision. Like he qualifies it. He's not trying to make a theological point. But so what I really liked about it is it does make you think, and there's a lot of worldview in there, like a lot of reasons why people reject the gospel in present life, and he, I think, articulates them well. People who are really holding on to vain things, and because they won't give them up and turn to God, they don't stay. They go back to the bus to go back to hell. And so it's really interesting to read through, and it kind of starts kind of slow, but it gets going. And once you're up there, once they've got off the bus, they're having all these conversations in heaven. It's really interesting. And then if you've read any of Lewis's discussions about George MacDonald, it's really interesting that it seems like every ghost's like solid person is someone from their previous life that come down to the mountains and talk to them specifically. So like family members and friends and spouses and things like that. And who is Lewis's solid person? It's George MacDonald. It's this author that he credits with really the beginning of his testimony of like, it was in MacDonald's writings that he started interacting with Christianity. And so you kind of piece that one together, that here's this figure, and it's like MacDonald came down out of heaven and reached me. It's a weird like associate, but he always exalts MacDonald. So
yeah, I'd like to get some feedback on somebody if you're really familiar with The Great Divorce, because what happened in Lewis's life? Who was it that was his spiritual father in real life? It was MacDonald. Okay, so it's almost like
Fantasties.
It's almost like he's combining his personal testimony with this ephemeral, ghostly, make-believe world.
It's, to use the word, it's very meta. Like he's describing, you're reading a story that he's writing about a guy that's kind of like him, and not to just do this, but it's like the Space Trilogy books where it's like at the end of those volumes, he like, and I wasn't supposed to tell people who it was because you can just go figure it out. It's like almost like he's saying it did happen, but we know it didn't really happen.
That's interesting because it reminds me of some of the stuff he says in Surprised by Joy, obviously. And I wasn't thinking it was the, space trilogy and abolition, but I'm curious about the connections. I mean, you just see the guy in all his writing, I'm sure. So,
Well, and something that we will eventually talk about on the podcast, there's a fascination with shadows in Lewis's books. And what are they? They're shadow people who don't have any substance, and then there's this bright, ghosty shadow guy that comes down out of the mountains. He references things like this in other books. Is what
We'll let
get to.
Charlie talk about that one in the future.
But not right now, because we have a lot to get to. So
if you had to put that on the goodness scale, where would it be?
that's a tough. Okay.
You weren't ready for that.
I'll help you out. I'll put it at a 5.
Okay. Thank you for saying that, because I was gonna say like maybe 6. Because what's the voice in the back of my mind is, where would it rank among other Lewis writings? And then by its level there, where would you put it on the scale? And so I think a 5 or 6 would be pretty appropriate.
Okay, well, I won't have any ranking on my book because I'm just starting it, and I won't have any spoilers because I'm just starting my book. So, listener,
Unless one of us have read it, in which case...
well, okay, watch it. No spoiler alerts. Okay. The book I'm starting is called The Making of an Atheist, How Immorality Leads to Unbelief. It's by James Spiegel. I think I'm saying that right, Spiegel or Spiegel. And it looks fantastic, I think. I've read the introduction and most of the first chapter, and it's starting off really good, really well. It's starting off great. I don't know how you want me to say that. But here's the issue. So in apologetics, we talk about atheism for a long few weeks, because I think that if you're in the West, in America, probably secularization and atheism, new atheism, are the things that you're going to encounter more so than like a paganism or another religion like Islam or Hinduism. Now, you will encounter those, and I had a person debate me on that, and they strongly say you're gonna encounter those different worldviews and religions. I agree. But at a fundamental level, at our entertainment industry and in our culture, I think where secularization and atheism is at is going to be much more relevant. So I'm going to step back and try to go faster, but I read a book by 2 guys. One's an atheist, one is a theist. Randall Rouser's the theist, and John Loftus is the atheist. It's called God or Godless. I made it halfway through, and what it is the atheist answers a question, and then the theist answers the same question. They kind of go back and forth. And so I kind of looked up John Loftus, and I found out he actually went to Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. He was an apologist who studied under William Lane Craig, and then eventually he walked away from Christianity, and he gave reasons. And so he has this website, Debunking Christianity, and he's always showing how Christianity is wrong in his opinion. And I remember early on when I was studying apologetics, getting nervous and, do I read this stuff? And I want to, if I'm not ready for it or whatever. And as I walked down the path of learning more about this, I met a number of people. Well, I met one person who walked away from Christianity and came back and explained why. At the time he was an atheist, he would have said it was because of the evidence for evolution. When he came back, he said, no, I was angry at God. So that tells me, and I've seen this sort of in other situations where you'll see an atheist who's saying it's about the evidence, but they're so angry, you just wonder, is there something else going on? And so his contention in this book is that, and this was so great, so I was reading through it, he said, it says, sorry about that noise there, listener. The psalmist says, the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim his handiwork. That's Psalm 19:1, and that's the general revelation chapter. So if you're going to study general revelation, that is the information all humans have without having a Bible about God. That's one of the chapters. He then goes on to say, but the Bible also says that the fool says in his heart, there is no God. Now that's Psalm 14:1. Now I've heard Psalm 14:1 before. The fool said in his heart, there is no God. But I never realized that was only half the verse. The second half says this. He says, the fool says in their heart, there is no God. Why? Because, and then he quotes the second half of the verse, they are corrupt, their deeds are vile. So his argument in this book is going to be that the actual root source of atheism isn't evidence to the contrary of Christianity, but it's actually walking in sin that leads you to the path of unbelief. So I'm really fascinated by this. I'm very interested in it. I have not made it all the way through, so I can't give it a goodness rating. But theologically, that sounds pretty sound right off the bat.
Sin makes you stupid.
Or you are inherently stupid and sinful. Maybe.
Well, even if you think of like Romans 1, where it talks about universal knowledge of God, what is it that people do to avoid that knowledge? They press it down.
Suppression.
Yeah, in unrighteousness. So I think the book looks interesting. I'll give you a goodness rating in, I don't know, a while.
A couple of days.
It's like Proverbs 2 as well. You have to search for wisdom. You have to go after it. And if you don't, or if you don't want to, well, God lets you remain stupid.
And now to this mystery guest we have sitting across the table.
Dun, dun, dun.
We will let you introduce yourself. So tell us your name, where you're from, what you do, and then jump in with a book for Books and Business.
Okay, well, I'm Jeff Newman, and I'm glad to be here, sort of in awe in the wonderful studio of the Thinklings.
Yikes.
I have no idea why they're laughing. It's completely puzzling to me.
The dungeon.
Yeah.
Well, I'm honored to be here, and I binge listened to previous episodes while flying various locations in North America during the month of December, and I really have one primary goal in being here today. I want to get the most horrenduses and the most eye rolls I can possibly get. So we'll see how that goes.
You see this book I have sitting over here? It's the Space Trilogy by C.S. Lewis. And if all you do is talk about that, you will get many, many Philistine eye rolls.
There are other goals I could have as well, but some goals are best kept to one's self. In working toward my first eye roll, my book is a book with no business, because you can find this book free in any number of places.
Books and Business. No business.
You're not selling this one.
Horrendous.
Horrendous. Okay, that's one. Okay, maybe two eye rolls. We'll see. The book was written in 1957 by a single female missionary, and the title of the book is Have We No Rights? And the subtitle is A Frank Discussion of the Rights of Missionaries. And it was published by Moody Press. And as you read it, you have to read it in its historical context. Surprise there, right? 1957, you have to read it in its geographical context, which I'll leave for you to find out on your own. But it's a very challenging read to help you to think about how do you see your life, and how do you see what you own, what you think is your right, what you're willing to surrender, stewardship. I'm not sure the book even uses the word stewardship, but it really helps you think about stewardship responsibilities before the Lord. So even if you're not a missionary, or that's not a role in life you have, I think reading it could help you to really think about the glory of Christ and how His glory ought to lead other things in our life to pale. And so she talks about the giving up the right of a standard of living, about the safeguards of good health, about privacy, about normal romance. No eye roll there, okay. Normal home life. And then her last short, and it's a short book, 100, depending on how it's paginated, because mostly it's electronic now, 125, 130 pages long. And her last chapter is He Had No Rights. And she ends the book with this: a right to myself. No, but oh, I have a right to Christ. All that He takes I will give. All that He gives will I take. He, my only right. He, the one right before which all other rights fade into nothingness. I have full right to Him. Oh, may He have full right to me. And reading the book really challenged me and humbled me and encouraged me.
That's really interesting. Who recommended it to you, or how did you stumble across? I mean, this is a really old book, 60 plus years old. Do you remember? What
It
led you to
actually showed up on a list of recommended reading of probably 50, 100 books in candidate class at Baptist Admissions as a book to read and to think and to consider and to discuss and to talk about.
It's just that's like a huge issue with, I could see missionaries, but even just with Americans today as we think through the pleasures and comforts that we have in our society and our culture. That's a really interesting book. I kind of like that. The only problem with that book is that I can't buy it.
You can't sell it.
Actually, it is available as a paperback and a hardcover.
Oh, it is.
Yeah,
it is.
but it's
Okay.
just those really expensive reprints. It's like $10.
Yes. Yeah.
So we do need to ask. Okay, we have this thing. You said you binge listened, watch. Well, maybe someday you can watch this podcast. But
It would be better listened to rather than watched.
Yes.
It really would be. Having seen what's going on here.
would have to upgrade our studio and ourselves just a little bit to make that appropriate. Tim, as normal, it's the winter. We're down in the dungeon. He's got his little blanket covering himself up.
We
Pretty
have
cold.
to turn the furnace off so that you don't hear it.
And you didn't warn me about this either, but
The production value
I
is
dare
so
not
high.
complain considering the book I just talked about. So
Oh, got us. That was
Yeah.
now,
good.
can I have a second book?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
And this one will fit books and business. And maybe it even flows out into a set of books. So maybe I can redeem myself from a free book to a whole set of things that you would benefit from.
Dr. Little's eyes just got really bright.
That's the opposite of the eye roll. So it's like a negative point. But,
There's a book written for children called "The Moon Is Always Round," and have you talked about that? I didn't think so.
Not on the
we
podcast.
haven't, but I'm familiar.
Yeah, and for any of us who have walked with ourselves or walked with adult children through the loss of a baby and trying to explain it to siblings, it's a beautiful book on that topic, and the author ties together the reality that what you see of the moon is not always round, but it is always round. And as a result, then the goodness of God is always present in all of the different phases, all of the different seasons of life. And in reading it, I was challenged and encouraged in my faith, and I think it really helped children to interact with their parents and be able to talk through some really hard things at a time where they're shaping and forming a view of God that has the potential to stick with them their whole life. And that particular publisher, New Growth Press, has a series of children's books that are probably like primary, junior age target audience on a variety of topics that you always can find things that you would have done differently, even in something you did yourself, but that I have found really helpful. And one of the benefits of the series is it has the text and illustrations of the children's books, and then it has helps for parents on how to talk about the themes in the book and go farther with them. So they're really good contribution to Christian children's literature.
Yeah, we've recommended those in the bookstore, and we usually have them all in stock. Those are some great titles. The Moon is Always Round is actually a really difficult title to sell. I've had to sell it to people, and the people that are buying it are people that you just want to give it to because you know what they're going through.
So I can't remember. Did we put the first book on the goodness scale? We did. Okay, so you
he's
mentioned
got
two titles, and yeah, that's where we got on the divergence. We talked about the binge watching, but it was the binge listening. So the listening, you've heard us with this goodness scale.
I've heard you, yes.
And so take a stab at where would you put these books on that scale?
Hey, so here you can edit this part out, okay? I'll lobby as the guest for a 1 to 5 goodness scale.
And
Since you've been
why-
talking about
like a
this goodness
spectrum?
scale, and I mean, it seems like you've been bantering the goodness scale for some time here, and so I will just do a little lobbying for a 1 to 5 because you seem to struggle with, is it a 6, is it a 7? And then
That's the fun of it.
That's the fun of it. One of the hats of my life has been things with assessment, and 1 to 5 scales are a little easier to wrestle with than 1 to 10 scales.
Too much stuff gets dropped into the 3 category in a 1 to 5 scale, though.
Yeah, well, okay.
Maybe we should do a 1 to 7. That's a nice compromise.
We'll talk about it.
I'll let you wrestle with it. You know me, I'm the guy who always comes in and stirs things up. That's my reputation everywhere I've been.
Yes.
But anyway, okay. So the first book on a 1 to 10. So 10 is like read it repeatedly, right?
An 8, 9, or a 10 is
Read it
buy it,
repeatedly.
read it more than once, and then to be on the scale, it's somewhat good. But like a 1, 2, and 3 is like, yeah, I enjoyed it, but maybe not for everyone.
Yeah, so I think you've got a 7 or an 8. I think you read it the first time, and you might find yourself arguing with it the first time you read it, partly because some of the ideas are sacrifices that aren't as commonly needed to be made in the 2000s as were in the 1950s. So you might stumble over that. But once you've gotten yourself through kind of the arguing with yourself about it, the second read, I think you can read it and strip that stuff away and say, what's really this author after? So what did I say? 6, 7, 5, 8.
What's the average of 6, 7, 5, and 8?
It's a 7.
Andy?
That's math.
Okay, it's math.
Don't ask me.
So then what about the moon is always round? Like throw a number out there for us.
You know, I think Tim said it well, that the person who is going to be most helped with that book, it's going to be hard to see him be helped by it. But for the topic, I would say a 9. Yeah, and especially, I think one of its benefits is it will give an opportunity for parents to talk about things that you wouldn't know how to bring up or how to talk about or what to say about it. Because whenever you bring it up, it's going to be hard. Whenever you bring it up, it's going to be awkward. And the book provides a metaphor that really helps you to talk about the topic.
Okay. So now let's. This is our first guest. So this is just kind of like uncharted territory. We have a bunch of questions we want to ask you. Okay, and you
Fire away.
We've sent these to you, but they still might have a shock value. Maybe we'll see. So, do you guys have the list pulled up? Okay, so just take a stab. Just start going somewhere.
Well, so the first thing we want to know is how you got here and why you're a teacher. So right now you teach in the seminary, you teach counseling courses, and until recently you were a teacher in the college. You've now moved on to a new ministry. If you want to maybe tell us a little bit about your new ministry that you're working on, and then how the Lord moved to get you into maybe both those places.
Sounds like you learned to ask questions from somebody I know. Big, broad, long questions.
Where would that need a moment?
Yeah.
You can take a moment.
That's an older one, Charlie. Your older listeners will get that one. I had to stop that one after the joke became on me. But anyway, oh my goodness.
The first time I did that,
I'll give a horrendous to that one.
A guest just said horrendous. That's got to be like a milestone in the program.
Yes, that's pretty good. But anyway, yeah.
Okay.
So give us the rundown.
Wow.
It deserved to be a horrendous.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, that was a double horrendous. Okay. So, and now I'm rethinking my horrendous because to agree with Tim has a certain cost to it. Anyway. Yeah. So
we're not messing around.
Well, my goal is to not get invited back.
Horrendous.
Oh my. Well, the path of my life in many ways is very common to man, but it follows somewhat an unpredictable path. So I didn't set my heart on teaching and set my heart on counseling.
I'm so sorry. The rest of the interview with Dr. Newman is only available on next week's episode of the Thinklings podcast. When will that be available? Tuesday morning, next week. Sorry to leave you hanging, but hopefully this entices you to come back next week. Thanks. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Thinklings Podcast. We would love to hear from you. If you have any feedback, suggestions, or potential topics that you'd like us to discuss, you can contact us through our email, thinklingspodcast@gmail.com. Remember, don't let this conversation end with this podcast. Read good books, talk about them with your friends, and always continue to cultivate your mind. See you next time on the Thinklings Podcast.